let's jump right into it. I mean, migration, this has a different meaning for different parts of the world. I mean, we've just saw there in that segment very much migration being weaponized, especially by the Kremlin, by Belarus. It was very much a topic about elections used here in the European parliamentary elections not so long ago. So what are we looking at here? Migration moving forward, is this still a topic that elicits a lot of emotion? What is the way forward for Europe, for the West to deal with this topic moving into the next months and years?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And yes, migration has now become the #1 issue in the American elections coming up. It was one of the #1 issues in the recent European parliamentary elections, which is why you saw gains by the ultra-right parties or the far-right parties in some countries. It's prompted President Macron in France to dismiss the parliament and call snap elections. The adversaries of democracy in the West have figured out that this is a wonderful way to disrupt the parties in power, the governments in power. And this will continue as long as it works. They'll keep doing it until something is done to try and regulate and constrain unregulated illegal migration.
Obviously, immigration, we have immigration, then we have unregulated migration, illegal migration. Obviously, these are very, very contentious topics. And one of the questions that comes to mind is why are private citizens so susceptible to reacting so strongly, and why are they always so frightened of illegal migration? And obviously, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but tell us what you think.
Well, okay, first of all, private citizens are very alarmed for a number of reasons because, again, I'll use the American example, but it applies here as well. You had people who supposedly crossed the border from Belarus and suddenly they end up in Germany. Well, the same thing happens in America. People illegally cross the border from Mexico into Texas or one of the other border states, and then they end up killing someone hundreds of miles away. So people associate, rightly or wrongly, they associate this unrestricted migration with an increase in crime, with an increase in overloading of social services. And then they also blame the politicians because, speaking for America, I can't speak for the EU, but speaking for America, the official immigration system is practically broken. So, and people wonder, that they see hundreds of millions of dollars going for funding for the different agencies which are supposed to be in charge of the border and are supposed to regulate migration and immigration, and yet nothing seems to be working.
It's also interesting, I mean, putting more of a European and a Central Eastern European context to it in our region. I mean, if we look at Poland's borders, if we look at the Baltic states, I mean, we've had very much recent hybrid attacks, very much the border fence that have been built up. This is something that, has a certain type of association in our part of the world. We know that the Kremlin is militarizing this against the West. So if we go more into Germany or more into Spain, it starts to change a little bit. It becomes more for migration, illegal migration, because of economic reasons as well. So I'm just wondering, can all these different views of migration, be it illegal, be it this hybrid warfare, can it be, let's say, put on the same level where there's unified policy? Do we all address it in the same way? If that's from an American standpoint, if that's from a European standpoint, is it something that we can unify a policy now? Because we know that voters have shown that many of them, their disregard, rather their dislike of how it's being carried out. Can we come to a policy that works for everyone? That's my question.
Okay, if you talk about a policy that works for everyone, yes, I believe you can. But that policy can no longer be reactive. It has to be forward-leaning. You're going to have to punish the people responsible for this, not try and figure out how we collectively clean up the mess. And we have to realize that the Kremlin and our other adversaries, they love this because this helps destabilize government. We all know that the part of the population which is most fearful of migration and which has the largest number of complaints about migration in Poland is the Peace Party, the people that sit out and scream Wina Tuska. And that's exactly what the Kremlin wants. And as long as it works, as I said before, they'll keep doing it until there are some rather draconian measures instituted. But reacting to the problem is never going to fix it.
You say fear of migration, but I think we also need to have a little bit of a more balanced view, because we speak of the fear of migration. However, we also have to recognize the fact that unregulated migration is leading to a lot of problems, in this region, let's say the Central and Eastern European regions, but also across Western Europe. I think there has been a recognition of the fact that unregulated migration has led to an uptick of a wide variety of social issues. So the EU is now having to deal with perhaps some rise of, let's say, voices that are trying to address this. How do we reconcile all of this in light of the geopolitical situation in the West? And obviously in America, you're dealing with your own range of immigration issues.
Well, let's go back a few years. Okay, now, do you remember when Merkel said, when she was the chancellor, and she said, "Okay, we'll take 500,000 migrants first year." They didn't take 500,000; they took 1.1 million. And in that same year, there were only 700,000 babies born in all of Germany, and not all of those were German. There were Ukrainians, Russians, Poles, Turks, you name it. This is a social policy which is a train to disaster. You cannot simply bring hordes of people into your country when you don't have the services to support them. And this is why, if we look at the popularity of these European politicians, Chancellor Scholz's popularity in Germany is so low, he makes Biden look like a superstar. He's at 25%. Macron is at 21%, is why he's called snap election. So clearly, the governments are committing suicide, in my opinion, and I don't know how you reconcile all this other than to become extremely restrictive about migration, because otherwise the system's just going to collapse. We're already seeing it.
I mean, if we look at also the numbers, I mean, in terms of asylum applications, just last year in 2023 across the European Union, figures I checked earlier, 1.3 million. Now that is shy of 1.4 million back in 2015. So we're looking at equal numbers. It's been a rise since these last 7 years. Now the European Union is touting an achievement with the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which has recently come into force, but we still need, I think, national details on that, but they're touting it as a policy win. Is part of the problem here that trying to centralize that, at least in Europe, that you're trying to reconcile, centralize this in one thing, that it becomes a problem? I mean, is this an issue that we can address on an EU-wide level, or is this something where national governments need to return to their policies, or can we do that? I mean, we're stuck in this back and forth between Brussels and national parties. We're looking at Frontex, we're looking at all these different things. Can the European Union, in your mind, in your estimation, really fix this? Is it something that this new policy or this new pact, is that enough, or should we go further? What's your assessment?
Well, okay, let's talk about definitions here. Asylum. When someone says, "I am seeking asylum," that means they have left their home country because they have a credible fear of some measure of personal danger being brought to them by virtue of a political affiliation, by virtue of they belong to a particular ethnic group, but they have a credible fear of persecution. That's what we mean by someone who's seeking asylum. Most of these people that are coming into the EU from across borders illegally, coming into the US, have no credible fear of persecution. They are economic migrants. So first of all, we have to get a definition and say we are willing to take asylum seekers, but what does asylum mean? And you enforce that definition.
Well, yeah, indeed. I mean, there are many layers to this, and I think part of that is exactly the problem is that we have to define it. This takes time. It goes through the bureaucracy. There's a lot of politicking involved in all this. But I think, as you pointed out earlier, many voters showed their displeasure of this in certain countries across Europe. But I suppose now the question is, what will policy really look like? And some might argue that it already is too late in some ways. Certain people, certain forces, including the Kremlin, will continue to exploit this, undermine our democracy. But I suppose the question is, what will happen next, not just in the United States, in Europe? What's your view here on this one, Reuben? Are we looking at a way still to patch something together? Can we still make this work? Can we make it work for many people that's fair, that's equitable? Or are we looking at something different?
I don't know how, when you say something which is fair and equitable. Okay, fair and equitable would be measured, adjudicated, regulated, controllable immigration. That's where you have to get to from here. Now, there are political parties in some countries that don't want that, because if you can bring a large number of people across the border and you're the party in power and you take care of them, then they will vote for you. You can change the electorate. That's one of the accusations that's been made in the United States, for example. But remember, this is also a national security problem. I spoke to your producer about this. We've had groups of people come across the border into the United States, and they are not from a Latin American country. They are not from a Central American country. They are from China, and they're all about the same age. And they're all wearing the same People's Liberation Army belt buckle. And they're all of military age. And they all have the same military unit tattoo. And they all have the same pocket litter. Now, what does that tell you?
Indeed.
Well, convoluted, interesting, but I don't think we're going to solve it here on tonight's program. But look, very interesting insights there. Always a pleasure to speak to you there, Reuben F. Johnson. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
It'll be convoluted until it blows up one day.
Well,
Yes.
we'll comment on different directions as all that happens, but we'll see how it turns out. Thanks again, Reuben. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep.